Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Batra daf Ayin. Chodesh Tov to everyone. Today's daf is sponsored by Laura Warshawski in loving memory of her mother Evelyn Margolis, Chaya Gittel Bat Avraham Yitzchak Beirut, on her first year at site. My mother was a role model for me, and I owe much of who I am and what I do to her example, including learning daf Yomi. We're going to get started with the very top of our daf, which is really a continuation of where we ended yesterday. So let's just remember, we were talking about somebody who sells a field. We said that it does it if the person said, I'm selling the field, but not including the trees, and there are no trees. So we said that kol she'olin, we said, depends on what's in the field. What if there's only palm trees? So Rav said, we talked about, right, it obviously means I'm sorry, I think I said it wrong. I'm selling the field including the trees. Sorry, that was my mistake. I'm selling the field including the trees. And there's no trees, meaning trees, we said, doesn't really usually mean palm trees, but there are palm trees. It means he's including the palm trees, or she's including the palm trees in that sale. Now, Rav had said, which trees are really included, though? The ones that could really more likely be called trees, which are the taller palm trees. Now, what makes them taller? How do we define? Kol she'olin lo bechevel, if you can only climb up there with a rope, that's shiur. That means that's what that's going to be what I'm referring to. Kol she'ein olin lo bechevel lo havi shiur. Okay, but if not, then not. Dayanei gola amre, but the dayanim of the gola, which the Rashbam says is Shmuel and Karna, we've seen them before, is quoted as the dayanei gola. Remember, Karna was the guy who Shmuel cursed, and he ended up growing the Karen, right? He cursed him based on his name. Kol sheha'ol kovsho lo havi shiur. By the way, remember the whole thing was that Shmuel ruled one way and told Karna to rule that way, and Karna ruled against him. In this case, they go together as the Dayanei Gola. They obviously did do rulings together, even though in that story they didn't. They give a different definition. Kol sheha'ol kovsho havi shiur, v'kol she'ein ha'ol kovsho, lo havi shiur, kol she'ein ha'ol kovsho havi shiur. What are we talking about here? He says it's a different definition according to the Dayanei Gola. It all depends on the yoke of the plow. Okay, when they do the plowing, they put on a yoke on these animals, and then they pull it, and they usually do it around trees. If the tree, again, there's two different explanations. I'll go with one. The tree gets pulled as you're going. Okay, that's the ol kovsho. Then that's not included in tree. A tree that can be moved as the plowshare, the plow with the awl on it goes through it, it makes it wave. That's not considered a tree. If it stands tall and doesn't bend at all, then it is. Some people say, what are you talking about, trees bending? And some people say it means if the awl goes over it, it means it's too short, and maybe that's a different criteria. Anyway, it seems to be a different interpretation, but the Gemara actually says lo pligi. There's actually really no debate between the Dayanei Gola and Rav. They were really talking about, by the way, it makes sense, it's Rav and there's Shmuel in his court, right, that they often argued. But habedikle habi ilane. Rav's explanation of how we determine it was talking about specifically palm trees. Why palm trees and a rope? Because regular trees, what's the difference between a palm tree and a regular tree? A palm tree is very tall, or it could be short, but there's no branches coming out of it. It's just this one tall trunk that doesn't have branches. So you can't climb it if it's a certain height unless you have a rope. So the rope was related to the palm trees. The criteria of the awl and the plowing and that determining, that's because in these trees, you don't need a rope anyway. All other trees, there's no need for a rope to climb up. You can climb up even to a very high tree. As long as you can get on branches, the branches are usually lower, and therefore you just use different criteria because they were talking about different kinds of trees, and there's really no debate. Okay, we're now going to get into a different sugya, but I want to remind you here where we started. We started with Dayanei HaGola, and there's going to be, basically we're in two sugyot today. We have the first sugya we're going to start right now, and then the second sugya, and the second sugya has nothing to do with our topic. It's going to bring us back to Bava Metzia laws. Okay, it's really a sugya that belongs to Bava Metzia, but it's here because mentioned within is Dayanei HaGola. Okay, so we'll get back there. Rav Acha Rav Huna Rav Sheshet. So now we're back to this case of the carob. That's how we got started on this. The Mishnah had said, if I sell a field, it does not include the carob, the carob tree that's grafted. And by the way, if you want to learn more about carobim and You can read Shuli Mishkan's article this week that went up yesterday, all about carob trees. So if you say, I'm selling you a field, it does not include carob trees that are grafted, and it does not include sycamore trees that are already matured. But what if I add certain words? So if you might remember, we've been discussing this for a while. If I add certain words, it must be coming to include something else, right? If it doesn't mean that. So we're going to get back to that. Rav Acha bar Huna by Rav Sheshet. So Rav Acha bar Huna asked Rav Sheshet the following question. Chutz mecharuv ploni. Chutz misadam ploni mahu. If I sell you my field, and let's say I have 10 carob trees, and I say I'm selling you this field, normally that would mean not any of the carob trees, but I say excluding this carob tree, meaning I want to keep that carob tree for myself. Does that imply that all the rest I'm giving to you, even though normally I wouldn't be? So otocham charuv hu de lo kane. Does that mean that the only one that you don't acquire, the lo kane is what you're, as the buyer, is acquiring, the only one you're not acquiring is that one, because that's what I said, which would be the simple explanation of what I said. I'm actually going to give you way more. I'm just keeping that one for myself. Har shar charuvim kane, but all the rest you would. All I meant was just this one you're not going to acquire, but all the rest you would acquire. O dilma shar charuvim nami lo kane. Or maybe you really don't get any, because any sale of a field doesn't include the carob trees, and therefore this wouldn't either. Now, intuitively, you would say, if we go by what I said and what we assume I meant, it sounds really like I meant only this one carob tree stay in mind. I'm giving you a lot more. But Amar Le, Rav Sheshet says, no, lo kana. You don't get any carob trees. Okay, why does Rav Sheshet hold this way? Seems to be that, okay, again, I say seems to be the Rashbam understands it as my added words to a sale should never make my position worse. Okay, so the fact that I added these words maybe means that I meant something else. So what could it possibly mean? Okay, we have to somehow explain it to mean something else, but it's not going to make my position any worse. By adding, right, there's a saying in Hebrew, kol mosif goreh, if you add too much, it actually makes it worse. But this is actually the opposite of that. It doesn't actually make it worse. Okay, now, what could it mean? So the Rashbam says, well, it sort of depends if you're Rabbi Akiva or the rabbis. If you're Rabbi Akiva who says, mocher ba'ayin yafa mocher, I do generously and I don't save myself a path. Well, if I sold you my field, but I had a whole bunch of carob trees and I said, but not this one meant, remember what the Mishnah said, that Rabbi Akiva would agree that if I said not this one or not something, what I meant was, since anyway, it's not included, right? Not this pit. What does it mean? I must have wanted to get a path to there. So perhaps that's what it means. According to Rabbi Akiva, when I said not this one means I'm keeping a path to that one. Perhaps that's what it means. According to the rabbis, the Rashbam suggests maybe it's just to enhance the star. That's what we saw yesterday, make a nicer star. Now, what does it mean to make a nicer star? It means that it gives me more rights. Because if you start claiming later, you sold this to me, I have it in writing. That's what it means to make a nicer document. A nicer document means something I will be able to use in a better manner down the road. So maybe there was one tree that was really special to me and I wanted it written down so that we don't have an argument about it later. The other ones maybe, okay, if we had an argument later, hopefully I could prove my point, but specifically this one I wanted to add, perhaps that's what's going on. Okay. But in any case, it really doesn't matter what I meant, and you're going to see that from the next version of this sugya, because we're going to have two versions of it, that possibly I said something that sounds like mumbo jumbo and really can't really be explained in any manner, but the point being that the Rashbam explains, I can't make my position any worse by adding words. That can't possibly make me less, if the basic default is I sell a field, it doesn't include the carob trees that are grafted. This isn't going to include carob trees that are grafted, even if I said, I'm not selling you this one. So now comes Rav Acha bar Huna, who asked the question and brings a difficulty from a Braita. Etive. Chutz mecharuv ploni, chutz misadam ploni, right? Obviously, it skips the beginning. I'm selling you a field, but I'm not including this charuv or this sadam, which is the exact same case we just asked about. Lo kana. Now, what does it mean, lo kana? We assume, or at least Rav Acha bar Huna is assuming, it's actually a little ambiguous here. Lo kana sounds like my lav oto charuv de lo kana. It sounds like you're specifically excluding just that tree. And when the Braita says he doesn't acquire, she doesn't acquire, it's referring to the buyer doesn't acquire that one tree. but it sounds like they would acquire all the others. Hashar charuvim kanat. Sounds like they would acquire all the rest. To which Rav Sheshet says, no. Amalei lo, afilu shar charuvim nami lo kana. No, lo kana could be referring to that, but it means lo kana that and all the others. He doesn't really say on what basis he reads it that way, but he says that's the way I read it. But he brings a further proof, and he compares it to a different similar case. A little bit of a different case, but it's sort of to highlight what the logic of Rav Sheshet is. Teda, di'ilu amrali, sadi mechura lecha chutz misadeh plonit. You have to understand the case, and maybe we'll change sadeh to house, because maybe it'll be easier for us to imagine. Most of us don't own fields, so it'll be a little different. Let's say I happen to own a whole bunch of houses on the block. Okay, it happens on my block, actually. There's a bunch of people from many, many years ago that happen to own a bunch of plots on the block. And they make a deal, and they sell one of the houses to somebody. So they say, this house is sold to you, but not the one next door. Okay, now, would you assume that that means that all the other, because I said not the house next door, it means but all the other houses on the block that belong to me are sold to you, right? If let's say it was me who owned all these houses on the block, and I said, I'm selling you this house, not the one next door. Could you come and claim that you now own all the other houses because I excluded this one and I didn't exclude all the others? That would be ridiculous, right? So that's basically his point. So let's read it inside. He says, if you said sadi b'chura lecha chutz misadeh plonit, this one sold to you, and the Rashbam adds chutz misadeh, meaning and not the one adjacent to it. Hahihu de lo kane. Ha'achroniata kane. What, you're going to think, I'm only excluding that field, but all my other fields are sold to you? No. Ela kana. Of course you didn't acquire all my fields. I didn't say I was selling you multiple fields. I said one field. And what was I saying? I was just saying, not this, but it doesn't mean I meant and everything else, yes. So hachanami lo kana. Also here, same thing in our case. It's different. It's not the same thing. Because here you're selling the whole field and you're just excluding the trees within the field. It's not the same thing. But he says, just like that, you could explain the wording that way. There was a reason, whatever reason it was, that I said not this one. But obviously, it's not going to be any worse for me. You're not going to be able to claim that you bought all the trees because those kind of trees are just not included in a sale. Now we're going to read the whole sugya in a different way. The question was a little different. The structure is going to be exactly the same. Question of Rav Acha Bar Huna to Rav Sheshet. Rav Sheshet answers. Rav Acha brings a braita to contradict. Rav Sheshet resolves it and then says, you can prove it from this case. But the question is going to be a little different. Ba'amine Rav Acha Bar Huna me Rav Sheshet. Chutz mi chatzi charuv ploni. Chutz mi chatzi sadam ploni mahu. So now what if you say, I'm selling you my field other than half this carob tree? So here it's a little bit tricky. Because if I say half this carob tree, I'm not selling you, it seems pretty clear that I'm selling you the other half of the tree. So the question is, do you acquire the other half of the tree? Now they're going to start off with the assumption that we obviously agree with the conclusion of the other sugya. Now, the other sugya didn't exist if this one does, because these are two different versions of the exact same question. But the premise of this is that clearly the other trees are not included in the sale. This doesn't have any effect on the other carob trees. Okay, they go by the default, which is sold a field, didn't sell the carob trees. So I keep the carob trees as the seller. So that's what they're going to say right now. Mahu. Shar charuvim v'dai lo kane. Obviously, the buyer does not acquire any of the other carob trees. But hamashashir ba'oto charuv kane, odil mafilu mashashir ba'oto charuv nami lo kane. But what about the other half of this tree? Because this is different. This isn't one tree as opposed to 10 other trees. This is, I said, I'm keeping half a tree. If I said I'm keeping half a tree, it seems to imply I'm giving you half a tree. But again, if we go with Rav Sheshet's logic from the previous, by adding words, I shouldn't make my position any worse, even though this time it's a little hard to understand what I meant, if not that I'm giving you half the tree. So that's the question. So since I said I'm keeping half this tree for myself, seems to imply I'm giving you half the tree. That's option one. Or maybe no, because I shouldn't make my position any worse just because I added something. So Amarle lo kane. Comes Rav Sheshet, just like in the previous, he has the same answer. He says the buyer does not get half that tree. Now, this is a little bit more strange because in the first case, we could at least explain what the logic was of what I could have meant. Here, you really can't explain very much what I really meant. Eitive. Well, again, we're going to have a problem from a Braita. And here this Braita is going to be a different Braita from before. It's going to say the same case we just had. Chutz michatzi carob ploni. Chutz michatzi sadam ploni. If you're excluding, if you say, I'm selling you the field, but excluding half a tree. Shar charuvin lo kana. Now, all it says is the buyer doesn't acquire all the other trees. Now, which sounds like what? That the buyer, though, would acquire half of this tree. So my lav shar charuvim hu de lo kane hamash shir boto charuv kana. Doesn't it sound like, well, they don't acquire all the other trees, but the buyer would acquire, though, this half, because it didn't say that it doesn't acquire the half. So Amarle lo. Now, Rav Sheshet said, no, they were just relating to the issue of the other trees. They weren't relating to the issue of the half tree, but yes, the half tree also wouldn't have been included. Afilu mashashir boto charuv nami lo kana. Okay, even that half, the buyer doesn't acquire. Teda. And you can further prove this, and now we're going to have the exact same thing, but with the exact same comparison, but with the half case. If I said, again, I own 10 houses on the block, and I say, I'm selling you this house, but not half the house next door, what? What? Do you think that means, okay, well, you don't get the other eight houses, but you do get the other half of that other house? No, I sold you my house. I wasn't selling you that house. So, hachanami lo kane. Also here, it wouldn't be kone. Now, the way I taught the sugya was the way the Rashbam learns the sugya. And there's a bit of a problem with it because, as I said, in the second version, there's really not much meaning to what I could have meant. Why would I possibly mention half of the tree if I didn't mean that I'm giving you the other half? So Rav Sheshet is kind of hard to understand. The Rashbam happens to quote another girsa, which the Rashbam says is not, he rejects the version of the Gemara. But I'll read it to you because there are others who, this is their version of the Gemara. And he quotes Itigaras, Ela lidame hachinami lidame. Instead of saying at the end of the sugya in both cases, Ela lokane, hachanami lokane, just like in the house, you didn't acquire it, like, or in the field, I use the house example, but I sold you this field, but not the one next door. It's not kone. Also here, it wouldn't be kone. But according to the other version, it says lidame. Okay, I'm adding this. If you get it, you get it. If you don't, you don't. It's just a side point, but I wanted you to show you that often what happens in a sugya, when there's something that doesn't make perfect sense, someone else comes up with an alternative explanation. And there might be issues with theirs as well. In fact, the Rashbam explains why he doesn't like this girsa, and I'm not going to go into all this. But I wanted to just point out that to resolve that issue, there's a different, again, I don't know if they created the version, they've had a version of it. Somehow there was a version that looked like this, that said, what you must have meant is lidame. What's lidame? For their value. What you were really saying is, I'm selling you this whole field, but not, right? But right, you said, chutz mi charuv ploni, but I'm deducting a certain amount. Now, you're not deducting the actual tree. You deduct the value of that tree. So I'm going to take a little more of the field for myself. I'm going to keep for myself, without selling it to you, the value of a carob tree, or in the second version, the value of half a carob tree. And then there's actually meaning to the statement. And then it resolves that issue. It creates other problems, but it at least resolves that issue. So I just wanted to point out that there's another version of what exactly is happening here. Okay, that's the main, right? There was this first sugya of the Dayanei Gola, but this was the first real sugya for today. And now we're going to go to the second sugya. And as I said, the Rashbam points out that the reason why the sugya is here, it's a Bava Mitzvah sugya, it has nothing to do with what we're talking about. It's just here because they're going to mention Dayanei Gola. But before we move on, I see there's a question about with the way the Rashbam understands it. Is it all about an access route? And I should just clarify, it's not all about an access route, because only according to Rabbi Akiva it would be about an access route, right? According to the rabbis, and the truth is we hold by the rabbis. So, and some of the commentaries say this is clearly all according to the rabbis, and therefore it's not only all about an access route, but it could be about just putting things in writing. Okay, the things that are important to you, you want it in writing, like we said yesterday, to make a shtar shvirata, a better shtar. Okay, a more shtar that's going to hold up later if I have any issues, and maybe that's why I added it. Again, why half? I don't know. It doesn't really explain the half. The Rashbam really doesn't have a great explanation for that. There's always weaknesses when you have difference of opinions. There's always weaknesses in each one, and it's important to highlight what the weaknesses of each commentary are. But if there was a clear answer and everyone would agree about it, when it's complicated, as we know, there's a lot of complex situations going on now with lots of different opinions. So that's just this is another kind of example of that. Okay, Rav Amram me Rav Chisda. So Rav Amram asked Rav Chisda a question in this sugya, and the question is this. Okay, what's going to happen is Rav Amram is going to ask Rav Chisda a question, Rav Chisda is going to answer, and Rav Amram is going to take the opposite position. So he says the following: I give you jewelry of mine to watch, and you give me a star that says, I gave you jewelry. Okay, imagine you go into a store to fix your watch. They keep your watch for a while. You get a little receipt. It says, I gave the watch. What happens? You go to pick up the watch. The guy takes, the person in the store takes the receipt, rips it up, throws it out, right? And end of story. The receipt is there to prove that you didn't get it back yet, right? If you go into the store with the receipt and the guy says, I don't have your watch, what are you going to say? What do you mean? Here's my receipt. So in our case, it's exactly what's going to happen. I give you my watch, let's say, with a star. I have a receipt. Va'amar and I go to pick it up from you, and you say, I already returned it. Mahu, are you believed? Here are the two sides. Mi amrinan, migo. Remember migo? What is migo? Well, you could have had a better lie. And what would be a better lie? You're a shomer. Now, we don't know what kind of shomer sachar, shomer chinam, right? Could be you're watching it for free. Could be you're watching it for money. It really doesn't matter. I'm giving my watch to fix. It's kind of the same kind of thing, even though I'm paying you. Or maybe I paid you already. Well, you can always claim that armed robbers came to my store, held me up by gunpoint, and I gave it to them, and you'd be exempt. So if you really didn't want to return it to me, that would have been the easiest lie, to say ne'ensu. Because you didn't say that, you'll be believed by a migo. Because if you really wanted an easy lie, you could have just said ne'ensu. So migo di bai amar ne'ensu. So you're believed on account that you're giving a worse lie. It's more complicated to claim I returned it. Because why is it a better claim? Well, first of all, if you say ne'ensu, I don't have a claim against you. I don't know. I can't argue. If you say I returned it and I say you didn't return it, well, then it's your word against mine. But since you could have had a better lie and you didn't take that better lie, therefore you're believed. So hashanami meheman. So we'll believe you with this claim since you could have made a better claim. Oh, Dilma. Or perhaps we say, or maybe I have a strong claim because I say, well, then what am I doing with the receipt? If you returned it, I shouldn't have a receipt in hand. So that's the question. Rav Chisda says, meheman. Rav Chisda says you're believed. Okay? Because of a migo. So comes Rav Amram and says, what about the fact that I have a receipt in hand? Why does that make you believed? Just because you have a migo. It's a bit hard to understand fully. But what Rav Chisda basically says is the following. If you had claimed, the whole claim of migo is based on, you could have said ne'ensu. Now, my star is obviously not so strong. Why? Because if you claim I was, armed robbers came, you'd be believed. Whether or not I have a receipt or not, it doesn't matter. The receipt's irrelevant. So therefore, since you're believed by amigo, then even though theoretically, when you say I returned it and I say, well, then what's the receipt doing in my hand? It doesn't really matter because your migo overrides that. Since your migo claim doesn't need, the receipt is irrelevant to that claim. Okay, my receipt has no power in the face of the ne'ensu claim. Therefore, you're believed in amigo because, again, you're believed now, even though I have a star in hand, because you could have had a better claim, which my star wouldn't have been able to stand up against. So therefore, you're believed. That's Rav Chisda. Rav Amram has another problem now with Rav Chisda. And the truth is, he just doesn't agree with Rav Chisda in general, but he keeps trying other claims. He says, well, Amar Lei, well, you forgot one important thing. Turning out to Amar Bet, sof ki Amar Lei ne'ensu, lav shvua bai. But if you claim your whole thing is based on ego, he says to Rav Chisda, that you could have claimed I was armed robbers came. But if you want to claim ne'ensu, don't you remember? You have to take an oath. You can't just say, oh, armed robbers came without any sort of, you don't have proof. If you have proof, it would be a whole different story. But you at least have to take an oath with a Sefer Torah or, a serious oath, which, usually that deters people if they're lying. So, Hachanami, my ne'eman b'shvuah. So Rav Nachman says, oh, well, I forgot to, I'm sorry, Rav Chisda says, I forgot to tell you, I meant with an oath, okay? Meaning, if I go to get, now let's go back to the beginning. I go to get my jewelry from your store or from your house or wherever it is that you're watching my jewelry, and you say, I gave it back to you. You're believed, according to Rav Chisda, because you could have said Nensu, but you're only believed if you go under oath and say it. So you have to go under oath and say, I swear I returned it to you. And then you'll be believed. Rav Amram doesn't think so. Okay. And now the Gemara says, or at least it seems like he doesn't believe that. The Gemara now says, Lema beplugte dahane tonight. Why don't we suggest that this is actually the same thing we're going to see in the Machloket Tanaim? Here comes the complicated part of the sugya, okay? Because we're going to get back to in Iska. You remember in Iska? In Iska is a business deal, an investment, where I give you money to basically invest my money, and you give me back the profits, right? We're going to split the profits 50-50. Okay, so I give you money, you're going to do all the work, and we're going to split it 50-50. Now, what's the problem? The problem is it's like interest. I give you money, you give me back more money. Can't do that. That's interest. So how do we avoid it? We view every iska, as we call it, as half loan, half pikadon. And that's why this is going to be similar, because we're going to focus on the half that's pikadon. Okay, let's try to remember how this works. The half that's a loan means if I give you money, you assume full responsibility for it. Right? So if something happens to it, you have to give me back the money anyway. If you lose all the money, you're going to have to return me that money. That half, I can't take any profits on because it's a loan and I'm not allowed to. It's interest. On that half, you're going to get the profits of. You're going to assume responsibility, and on account of that, you get the profits for it. So that's the half of the profits you're going to get. Now, this is all just on paper because you're going to get half the profits. I'm going to get half the profits. Just your profits are viewed as half the profits on the loan. My profits are going to be on the pikadon because it's as if I'm giving you an object and you're giving it to me back. Oh, now it happens to be worth more. Well, I'm getting it worth more. That's not a loan. That's I'm giving you something to watch and you're giving it back to me and I'm assuming responsibility for it. That means already it's not a loan because a loan you would assume responsibility for. As soon as we take it out of the realm of loans, it's in the realm of pikadon, and then the laws of pikadon apply. That's why we're going to think that this is connected, because there's going to be a debate about whether if there's an issue of having returned it, who's believed, okay? Can you say, I returned it or not? Okay, and that's going to be the pikadon part. Now, in a loan, let's just talk about a loan. If I loan you money, okay, and this is going to be the loan part, which we're going to basically stick aside because we don't care about this part. But if I loan you money, and then we have an argument, did you pay me back or not? And I have the shtar in hand, everyone agrees, there's no debate about it. I have a shtar in hand, I get my money back. You're not believed to say, I returned the loan. Okay, that's just not, it doesn't work in a loan case. So we're going to have a debate here about half the money. Okay, can I get all the money back? Because I definitely can get the money back for the half as long as I have the loan, as long as I have the document in hand, the loan part. The debate is going to be about the other half, about the pikadon part. And there's going to be one other issue here, which is we're not talking about getting it back from the person I invested the money with. We're talking about the person I invested the money with died, and now I'm dealing with their heirs. Okay, that's another element, which is going to become significant down the road. So right now, they're going to suggest it's based on this Tanaitic Machloket. Now, there's a bit of a problem with this Gemara because they're going to quote, and this is why we brought this whole sugya, because there's a debate between the Dayanei HaGolah, the Dayanim in Israel, which we already explained is Shmuel and Karna. I'm sorry, the Dayanim in Babylonia, Shmuel and Karna, versus the Dayanei Eretz Israel, versus the Dayanim in Israel. Now, it's a bit of a problem. We just said it's Machloket Tanaim, and it's going to be between Dayanei Golah and Dayanei Eretz Israel. So either you have to say Dayanei Golah and Dayanei Eretz Israel or someone earlier, and they're Tanaim, which is what it sounds like from the wording of the Gemara here. Some people have a different girsa that it's just Bahani Plugta. It's based on the same Machloket, which is not Machloket Tanaim, which makes a lot more sense. And then we're talking about the same Dayanei Golah we were dealing with before, and they're a Moraim, and it's not a Tanaitic debate at all. That seems to be the more likely pshat here, okay? But that's a side point, because it's more semantics, what language is used here and what we're talking about. But we're basically trying to say this is the same as some other machloket we know about. Okay, so now, And then you wouldn't have the word Titania, as it says in a Braita. It wouldn't be from a Braita, it would be from Emoraim. Shtar kis hayotze al hayitomim. Shtar kis is another word for this kind of iska that we said, this investment. Okay, a joint venture. I give you money, you're going to invest it for me, and we're going to split the proceeds. So, shtar kis hayotze al hayitomim. Now, what happens? I go to get my money back. I say, okay, I never got my money back from this investment. And I go to the orphans because the person I gave it to originally is no longer here, no longer alive. And I go to the orphans and I say, listen, your father never gave me back my investment. Now, we always know it's a bit of a problem with the orphans. We don't know that the orphans don't always know what the father did. So, Dayane Gola Amri. Now, but the issue is I have a shtar in hand. So the assumption is if it had been paid, if the person had paid me back already, the deceased, we would have ripped up the shtar. So I have a pretty good claim. And that's why, in fact, the Dayane Gola Amri, Nishba v'goveh kulo. I get the whole thing back. The pikadon part for sure. I'm sorry, the loan part, halva, for sure I get back, because anytime I have shtar, I get it back. And the pikadon part I get back as well. And that would be like Rav Amram, who holds that when I go to get a pikadon, the fact that I have a shtar in hand is basically the proof that I didn't get it back. And Dayanei Eretz Yisrael Amre Nishba v'goveh mechza. The Dayanim in Israel say I can only get back half, only the half of the loan, not the half that we view as a pikadon. I gave you the item. You claim the father gave it back already, and you can be believed because the father, could have made a claim against me and said, listen, then sue. And therefore, a claim saying my father gave it back would be accepted, even though I have a shtar in hand, because the claim that the father gave it back is stronger because of a migo, because the father could have said something happened to it. And remember, the pikadon side, I assume responsibility for. So if some onus happened, I lose my investment, that half of the investment. So that's why that half I don't get back. So let's read it inside. This is, I explain the machloket the way the Gemara is going to first explain the machloket. Later, we're going to say maybe it's based on something different. This is just giving you background that I already gave you because it was hard to explain this without telling you in advance. But everyone agrees like Nahardea. Da'amre Nahardea, they said, hi iska, when you have an iska like this, a shtar kis, some sort of business dealing where I'm giving you money to invest, palga milve, palga pikadon, we view it as half loan, half pikadon, half that I'm giving you this to watch for me, but it's really my item, right? Remember, a loan is I'm giving you something and you're going to give me back, right? I give you $100, you're going to give me back some other $100, right? You're not giving me back the exact same $100. Pikadon means you're basically giving me back my item, whatever it was I gave you. If I gave you a $100 bill, you're going to give me back that $100 bill. So we view this as it's got two different elements in it. And then, if so, my la bahakamiflage, is this not the root of the machloket? Demar saval. The first opinion, the Dayanei Golau said I could get the whole thing back is because I have the shtar in hand, and that overrides everything. Like Rav Amram said, Umar Savar lo, or lo Amar le shtari biyadach my bai, because you have a migo, and that's Rav Chisda. We don't say my shtar wins out overall because you have the children of this person who died who took my money can claim. My father could have claimed and sue, so therefore my father could have claimed he paid it back, and we're going to make that claim for him, and they'll be believed. To which the Gemara says, no, that's not necessarily. This machloket doesn't necessarily have to do with our machloket, because we're talking about orphans, and there's a different issue at hand. Amrei lo, kuleame iluhu de Rav Chisda. You can actually explain that everyone agrees with Rav Chisda, that really there is a migo, and the children should be believed. So now we're left to explain, well then, why are they not believed according to the Dayanei Gola who said I could collect the whole thing? It's not because the shtar means so much. But the root of the machloket is this. And it's a very interesting machloket to think about. Mar savar im ita de pare memer hava amar. What do most people do on their deathbed? They make sure to tell their kids anything that's important. If you remember when David HaMelech dies, right? He makes sure to sit down Shlomo and tell them all the things that are important, right? So he says here, well, if he had paid back the money, and remember, I still have a shtar in hand. Now, those are things you remember, right? For whatever reason, I have a shtar, don't know why. if the father really had given me back my money of this business deal, he would make sure before he dies to tell the children, just make sure that I want you to know I gave back this investment. Now, the fact that the children don't know this weakens their position. So normally we would say, like Rav Chisda, the kids are believed by migo, because the father could have said and sue and all this, but there's something weaker that weakens their position here because they don't know from the father. If they're not claiming our father said he gave it back, right? That we heard directly from him, they're not claiming that. They're just saying, they're just saying our father gave it back, but not that the father clearly told them. So he would have told them, and he didn't tell them. That weakens their claim. Umar Savar, the other one says, what do you mean? Exactly like you're writing in the chat. Or Malach HaMavet, who da'an say, maybe the Malach HaMavet came and took him before he had a chance to tell his children. The fact that he didn't manage to tell his children before he dies isn't an indicator that he hadn't paid back the money. Maybe just he didn't have an opportunity to tell them. That often happens. So in the end, this is the conclusion of the Gemara, that you can't necessarily say that the machloket is about this issue that Rav Chisda and Rav Amram disagreed about. Do we have a migo, or is the star stronger than the migo? But it had to do with, can we assume that a person will make sure to tell their children before they die? Or do we assume that something could have happened and prevented them from doing it? Which is a bit of a strange machloket to think about, because it really depends on the scenario. Some people have the opportunity before they die and some people don't. Or, it could be you had the chance, but it just didn't happen yet. You were going to and died 2 minutes before, even if, it didn't happen all in 1 second. Okay, now we're going to see some psikot halacha about this. So, Shalach Rav Huna bar Avin, hamafkid etzel chavero b'shtar. Okay, now we're going back to case 1. Remember, what we did was we took case 1, I gave jewelry to watch, and you claim you returned it. We compared it to case 2, which was this business dealing with a person who died and left it to the orphans. We thought they were comparable in the beginning, and then we said, no, they're 2 different issues. But now for a minute, we're going to maybe think that they're the same and then go back to saying, no, they're not. So Rav Huna bar Avin ruled on both, but it sounds like he sort of contradicts each other, because he says, if I gave you my jewelry to watch and I had a star for it, and you said, I returned it, Ne'eman, you be believed. Right? This is based on Rav Chisda on a migo. Ushtar kis hayotze al yatomim nishbava goveh kulo. But when it comes to the shtar kis of the yatomim with the orphans, I can get the whole thing back, and the orphans are not believed. So the Gemara says, Tarte, how could he say these both? Because what do you mean? Either the person's believed or they're not believed, right? Either we go with the migo, and then the orphans should be believed as well based on the migo. To which they answer the obvious answer, which is no. Even if you say the orphans theoretically should be believed by a migo, there's a separate issue here that weakens their claim, as we just said, which is Shane Hatam. In the case of the orphans, it's different. Dinita de pare meimar hava amar, because obviously Huna bar Natan holds on the position that the father should have told the orphans before he died. If he didn't tell the orphans before he died, it's not the case. It must be he really didn't return the investment, and that's why I can get the whole thing back. Now we're going to have a different psika, which is Rava Amar Hilchatan Ishba V'Gov Mechza. So Rava says the halacha actually is that I can actually only get half back, because in that case we're going to assume, number one, the kids are believed by a migo, and their position isn't weakened because maybe the father died unexpectedly and didn't have a chance to tell the children. So therefore, I don't get that half back. I obviously get the loan part back, but I don't get the bikadon part back. So Amar Mar Zutra Hilchatak Kedayanei Gola. Now Mar Zutra said the halacha is like the Dayanei Gola. Now let's go back. What do the Dayanei Gola say? They say Nishba V'Goveh Kulo. They were the ones who said you get the whole thing back. So now they go to Mar Zutra and they say, Ravina says to Mar Zutra, Amalei Ravina le Mar Zutra, Ha'amar Rava Nishba V'Goveh Mechza. How could you go against Rava? He said you get half. Why do you say you get to take the whole thing back? Amar le. Now what did Mar Zutra say? He didn't say Nishba v'goveh kulo. He just said, I hold like Dayanei Gola. So what does he say? And this is similar to a sugi we saw recently. Amalei anan de Dayanei Gola ibcha matninan le. I had the opposite version of what the guy Dayanei Gola said. In my version of Dayanei Gola, they said you only get half. So I actually agree with Rava. I just said it in those words, and this reminds us of one of the lessons we learned there, that It should be more specific. When you say, I hold by this position, you should say what the position is and not who said the position, because often people confuse who said what. They won't necessarily, if you say it directly, what exactly it is I hold, it's more clear. Okay, so what did we do today? And that got us already to the next Mishnah. Tomorrow we'll start with a new, not exactly a whole new topic, but within our topics, but a new Mishnah. So we finished up with this, what's considered a tree. If I say tree, what do I mean? What kind of height, what kind of strength? And then we did basically two main sugyot, two different versions of what Rav Acha Rav Huna asked Rav Sheshet. Either if you exclude one carob tree that's grafted, right? Even though really all should have been excluded, what did I mean when I said one? And does that mean only this one? And actually you're going to get all of them? And the answer is no. And what, according to the second version, what if I said other than this half a tree? Does that mean you get the other half of the tree? And even then Rav Sheshet said no, even though we raised some difficulties with this. Then, and within each sugya, we had Rav Acha Bar Huna, who asked the question, who then raises difficulty from a Braita. Rav Sheshet explains the Braita, and then Rav Sheshet further proves it from comparing it to this example of selling a field and not the next door field, or not half of the next door field, and basically saying there's no way you would claim that, either the other half of that field becomes yours as well, or all the other fields that you own become yours. There's no way, and therefore compares that to the carob tree case. From there, because we mentioned Dayanei Golan at the very beginning of our daf, it's also a little out of order. You would have thought we would have gone back, but I guess they wanted to kind of finish off the topics connected to the Mishnah, and then brought this big tangent about doing a business deal, or before the business deal, really the case of, I give you something to watch and you claim you returned it. Are you believed by a migo or not? Is it just like this machloket with a business dealing in orphans and them claiming our father already gave it back to you? Is it the same machloket between Dayanei Golan and Dayanei Eretz Yisrael? And in the end, they say, no, it's not the same machloket. There, it all depends on whether you assume a father has an opportunity before they die to be able to tell the children, and he for sure would have managed to do this. Or do you say, what do you mean? Often cases, they can't do that, and we have to assume, maybe he wanted to but didn't, and that doesn't prove anything and doesn't weaken the orphan's claim at all. So with that, we'll end for today, and wishing everyone a Chodesh Tov. It'll be a month that brings heralds in hopefully some good news and more calm in our country.